I do not subscribe to the 4% rule because I do not like touching and liquidating anything and living off of it. I preach to people that you should be living off of the cash flow of the investments, and that way your principal is never touched.
Welcome into the Get Invested podcast, a podcast about all things real estate and real estate investing, brought to you by Capital Velocity Investments and a part of the Matthias Talks Investing Substack.
Hello. Welcome in, everybody, to another edition of the Get Invested podcast. As always, we're your hosts, Jordan and Matthias, and we're excited to be here and talk all things investing, real estate, and real estate investing. Today's topic, I got to shout out. This was my wife's suggestion, so Rachel, way to go, suggesting this topic. We're going to talk about investing after 65, or 65 is arbitrary, I guess, really, a little bit. But what was it you said, rather than for your golden years, during your golden years?
Yeah.
Okay. Absolutely. So that's our topic today. But before we jump into that, Matthias, what's been going on down there in Destin?
Not a lot. We're recovered from the great sickness of 2026, which was last week, where basically the whole house was a mess. Probably still sound a little bit hoarse or whatever, but feeling back to normal. So other than that, baseball. Ethan's doing baseball. It was cool. He had practice last night. That was fun. I got to help out and feel like I knew what I was doing around a baseball field again.
I wanted to ask you.
First time in, I don't know, 25 years.
Right. I was going to ask you yesterday when you said that's what you were doing. So is it coach pitch at this point? Is it T-ball?
Machine pitch. It's machine pitch for Ethan, who's a 7-year-old. He's in the under or 7 and under league, because I think there's 6-year-olds on his team. So I think that his next year he'll go to the 9 and under or whatever.
Yeah, I remember for us it was 7 and 8 was when we were on the Astros.
I don't remember the ages at all.
I'm pretty sure it was 9 was when you moved to pitching. Like we pitched to ourselves.
Kid pitch. Yeah.
Kid pitch. Yeah.
I think the next leg up is when they get to the kid pitch.
Okay. So he is basically in coach pitch. It's just a machine now, probably a little bit more accurate than.
Yeah. Although one kid did get really close to getting beamed last night. He didn't even budge. I was like, that kid's a trooper, because I would have jumped on that one. But but for the most part, it's pretty accurate.
That just reminded me, I was listening to Nate Bargatze's podcast, Nate Land. Someone wrote in about watching a coach get the yips.
I think I heard about this. I think this
literally
was viral.
hitting kids because he couldn't throw it across the plate. Like, can you imagine?
Oh, that would be so funny if you were in the stands and not related to any of the kids. You're just watching a coach just beam batter after batter.
And obviously they're not throwing it hard, but you'd almost get accused of cheating. It's like, he doesn't get a free base because you hit him, right?
Yeah, it's like, are you angry at these kids? That would be so funny.
I guess with the machine, they can't get walks, can they?
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't really know. There's been no games yet, so I actually don't know the rules. I mean, we spend most of the time getting the kids to quit throwing their gloves in the air and turn around, and you know what I mean? So
sure. We'll see. You've gone through the basics with Ethan, butt down, glove down.
We're still working on turning the glove over to catch. And he struggles to close the glove. It's still in that. I mean, we've oiled it. We've done all the stuff, but it just takes time and use. Yeah. And that's a certain lefty. So yeah, I know. And it's just
not going to have until you do.
Yeah.
Right.
So he can catch. It's just he struggles to turn it over and close the glove when he does turn it over.
How does he feel about ground balls coming at him?
He's good. He's good at those. Good at keeping it in front of him.
I just remember
I haven't thrown him too many hot grounders and stuff because I don't want to.
That was always the defining line, right? When we were playing at that age, it was like the kids that could get in front of the ground ball and field it, and the kids who were scared of it.
100%. Now, he's not scared of it, which is nice. Yeah, exactly. We were playing the other day with one of his buddies, and that kid, every time I threw him the ball, whether it was a grounder or in the air or pop up or whatever, the glove would be the only thing there. Like, he's just backing away. He's
just moving out of the path of it.
Yeah, it's just like, nah, we're not going to get hit by this ball. We're not going to catch it probably, but we're definitely not going to get hit.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing, I guess, just because so many people, it's like, hey, why don't you try baseball while you're young? Get some activity. It's baseball. It's American. It is funny how many people end up playing something that they're like afraid of the ball. Mm-hmm. The very thing that you have to play the game. They're afraid of.
You don't want to. Yeah, I mean, it does hurt.
People on the basketball court like dodging the basketball when it's thrown to them.
Be funny.
Although you do see people like Lissette when she was younger and mom and dad were still trying to get her into all the sports, playing defense when her team had the ball. That was pretty fun.
Mhm.
That was hilarious. Yeah. Hey, she locked down that person she was defending. Yep. They did not get the ball the whole possession.
Oh boy.
Well, we're going to just kind of dive in. I don't think anything too technical about mindset, I guess, Matthias. You want to just take us away about what you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, so, you alluded to it earlier, but basically all of us, not all of us, many of us are, we're investing for the future one way or another. We're trying to build wealth. We're trying to give ourselves the financial freedom to do, work on our own terms and all the things that we talk about all the time on here. But it's an interesting change when you are in your retirement years. You are retired. You have, built wealth over your, you were working your whole life, and now you're retired. But we still have plenty of investors in that age bracket, I would say, that invest with us. And I think it's interesting to talk about the kind of different, like the priorities change, obviously, and the strategies might change depending on the individual person that's investing. But I mean, it's just a different than we talk long term. We talk, hey, building wealth over time. It's not going to be overnight. But what is the change that, this is what we're going to talk about today, basically, is what are the changes when you have built wealth, you're in your golden years, you're retired. Why do those people invest, and what are their objectives, I guess, is what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. These days, it makes you start thinking about it as just like a phase, right? Because just a different phase. It's not like not an end. I don't want to not to be morbid, but because so many people live so long that, this era could be,
you could be retired for 30 years,
Yeah.
Legitimately.
Exactly. Okay. So if we're going to talk about it like this, maybe you got 2 or 3 kind of like objective shifts, right? It goes from this to this. What would you say those would be if you want to outline?
Yeah, I'd say, well, as an older person, one, you're probably working with more capital, but your objectives are going to be different, like you said. So number one, you're probably in capital preservation mode, right? Like inflation eats stuff up. You don't want to put stuff in risky stock markets where it's doing like this, because this is what you're living off of, right? You don't have income coming in from a job, and you either can't or don't want to, understandably, don't want to have to get a job at any point. So capital preservation is one of them. If you want to put your funds in an asset that is not susceptible to fluctuations all the time. That's one. And then 2 is going to be cash flow, right? You're living off of these, and we can briefly get into it, but basically people may have heard of the 4% rule. It's kind of like, hey, do I have enough money to retire? Financial advisors like to adhere to the 4% rules. Like, well, if you can liquidate 4% of your net worth each year, you should, to meet your your lifestyle objectives, let's say it's 100,000, whatever it might be, whatever the cost of your lifestyle is, then you should be good. I do not subscribe to the 4% rule because I do not like touching and liquidating anything and living off of it. I would much rather, I preach to people that you should probably be living off of the cash flow of the investments, and that way your principal is never touched. You don't have to sell. I mean, in an emergency you could, but that will support you forever. Because if you're liquidating that at some point, especially in a market downturn that is poor timing for your personal life, you could run into some real trouble that way. So I'm a firm believer that people should be living off the cash flow from their investments, not the principal, as it were.
Having been my own financial manager and planner, and having never gone to one of these people, I guess I've never, I don't think anybody's ever pitched it to me, but it does seem, just as a mindset, it does seem strange that you you're basically putting a clock on yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for eons, everybody thought, have I saved enough to retire? That's what everybody thinks. Will this last me through my retirement? Because everybody thinks, most people, I don't say everybody, most people think that, you save a stack of cash and then you live off that stack of cash for as long as, until hopefully you pass away before you run out, and then you pass on the rest of it to your heirs. I have never subscribed to that, but many people do. That's that's the normal plan is, very few people have pensions anymore. You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily retire with a pension, which is or an annuity. People buy into annuities that pay them, which is kind of a way to live off the cash flow, I suppose. But I think it's much more it's much safer to put your funds into an appreciating asset that doesn't fluctuate like the stock market, even bond markets at times, and pays you, and obviously you'd have to have enough invested that you could live off the cash flow, right? So my calculations would be different from the 4% rule, but
it does seem like if you saved enough to feel comfortable, and I mean, if you're putting it in, an investment, mutual fund, whatever, and it grows and grows and grows and grows for 40 years, then you're like, okay, I have X amount of dollars that I can now pull from. The rules, I've satisfied all the rules, the age, et cetera, et cetera. If you've saved that amount of money that you feel comfortable that you can live on it for years by slowly drawing it, it's enough money to deploy and make an income.
I would agree,
at a level that you would be comfortable with, right? I mean, it seems like you would have to have like $2 million to be comfortable anyways, or something to say, this will last me anywhere from 20 to 40 years. So
yeah, 100%. But I also think that's a problem, a shortcoming, let's say, with our financial advisor industry, is that they don't get paid. They don't get paid on assets outside of the only ones they can sell. And I don't know that they would sell, what are you going to buy? Like not municipal bonds, maybe federal treasuries. What would be safe enough, but still pay a decent income where you would be able to live off that income? There's not a whole lot of assets that they're in preservation and they're in hedging and diversification, but they're not going to tell you, they're not going to advise people, hey, go buy income producing real estate, because one, that's going to hold its value. It's not going to fluctuate like the stock market or the bond market. It's going to pay you. Yes, there are other concerns, and obviously, you have to operate it properly and all those things, but that's way outside their purview of what a financial advisor would recommend to people, so that it's often does not enter their calculus.
So I know that we've talked about this before, and I remember you wrote a newsletter about it. Oh, it was a while ago.
Ages ago.
Yeah. I think it was like last summer, but
I do have a particular soapbox on this topic, but yes.
Yeah, because this is not where we thought this was going to go, but now that you've started it,
here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Everywhere we go, that's where we are. If you're doing the 4%, theoretically, I guess if I'm trying to work this thought process out, you're saying, okay, I have 4% for 25 years, essentially. Right.
Well, it's not just in cash. You're liquidating 4%. You have
liquidating,
30%
so you
allocated.
are making some. Okay.
Yeah. So like, you're still in the stock market or whatever, and you're counting that the long-term average percentage return coming, the 7-8%, whatever, is going to cover for the 4% that you're taking, within reason, right? Like, and that's why the downturn, if you have a downturn early on in your retirement years per se, then that 4% costs you a lot more, right? Because your portfolio shrank and you had to liquidate 4%. That's the problem with that 4% rules. Because now, granted, if you have 10 years of great market returns, average or above average returns, then you're golden, right? Because you've been liquidating, but you've been growing at faster than you've been liquidating, so you're good to go. But it all depends on when that inevitable downturn happens versus when you retire. So if it happens early in your retirement, you're in trouble because you lose a lot more than your.
So the goal is to basically liquidate what you have earned, not necessarily the capital itself, although it will also be some of that as well at times.
Right. But it just assumes you will liquidate 4% each year of your retirement to live off of.
I guess the other reason I'm stuck on that is because it's like, well, if you liquidate 4%, couldn't you just like make 4% instead? Or you're making a certain amount and you liquidate 4%?
You're hoping you're making a certain amount and you're liquidating 4%.
So if that's enough to live on, I guess what I'm saying, if that's enough to live on, why can't you turn it around and be like, okay, I make 5%, I live on.
Well, because you have to, in the stock market, you're not necessarily getting that in dividends. You're making the return you're making is in equity. Growth. So it's not, you have to liquidate to access the equity. So that's the problem. That therein lies the problem. That
but
cash
it's also
flow,
it can create a doom cycle, right?
Very much.
Downturn, you have to liquidate, means you have less, make less, liquidate.
100%. Yep.
Yeah.
And then you have to adjust your strategy because, and on that, the other problem with it is that it assumes like you never have any more money to put in. So the way to get out of a downturn is to, double down on the value, buy at a discount, but you can't do that in this scenario because you got a finite amount and you're not, You don't have
right.
any
You
more
can't
cash
take
to deploy.
advantage
Right.
of the dip to be able to recover on the other side
Exactly.
because you don't have, this is your cash flow. Okay. Do you just know of this, or has this been pitched to you before, or is this just kind of like the logic of?
It's not been. It's people talk about it when they're getting close to retirement.
I know that
a
what you're
bit of
saying is
a
accurate.
bit of
I'm just
investing
wondering.
nerd.
Yeah.
So no, but I've had this discussion with other guys and talking
Yeah.
about planning for retirement and whatever. And yeah, many people subscribe to it because that's the common the going rate, as it were. That's what people do. So I tell them I don't like that, and I explain my position as I'm
Right.
laying it out here. Many people subscribe to it, and honestly, if you get you amass $5 million or whatever over your working life, then a downturn in the first year probably isn't going to hurt you, as you know what I mean. Like depending
You
on
can
your
ride it
lifestyle,
out.
yeah,
Yeah.
you can get enough that it doesn't matter. Obviously,
Sure.
not everybody's going to get to that place, though.
Yeah. I would assume, based on this being, if we're talking about the typical strategy for the quote unquote typical retiree, I would say probably on average, typical retiree doesn't have 5 million.
Correct. That's a good assumption.
Yeah, because if they have 5 million, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There would be so many different ways in which they could.
Yeah, well, they'd be in a family office, and they wouldn't be, they're not working with your average financial advisor.
Even at that much, even if you make 3%, you can still be just okay. Fine. Yeah, you can just put it in like the safest CD on the planet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so we're thinking preservation. Yes. Maybe, but we don't
cash flow to live off of.
Cash flow to live off of. Put the 4% rule aside.
Yeah. So yeah. So I mean, if you're for our investors, a lot of what they're looking for is they want to keep growing and they want the stability of that preservation of capital. But again, it's the cash flow that as they transition out of working, maybe they're still doing part-time or they're just supplementing their pension or their 401k or whatever it is that they're, the Social Security, whatever it is, they're and they're just able to travel, able to do, the lifestyle, whatever the lifestyle is that they want to live. While there's, my wife's parents, for instance, they're traveling the heck out. They're doing cruising all over the world right now because they're like, hey, it's a clock. At some point, we're not going to be able to travel anymore, so they're trying to get it all in before, while they can.
I was just thinking about them when you said that.
The time off. Yeah, me too. They popped in my head because that's what they're doing with their time they have right now. Because it's inevitable at some point that they won't be able to, health wise, won't be able to travel in mobility and all that. So really, the reasons they invest aren't crazy different than kind of our standard beginner investor that we talk to, but there are nuances, I guess, to it. Whereas younger people investing, they're not necessarily. Yes, they don't want to lose money, but preservation of capital is not. I mean, they need to put their capital to work and grow for the long-term future, to get to where the retirement years are. So I guess in talking with, I'm bouncing around here, but basically in talking with some of my older investors, they are concerned with the timeline of the investments. We tip our typical investment, we say, hey, 7 to 10 years, returning capital in 3 to 5 years. That does give them pause. And if they're not investing with a trust or with a survivor, a tenant, certain entities that you can invest as to that will, in the event of a passing, that it would make it simple versus difficult for your loved ones to access whatever the investment was. So that is definitely a concern, much less so for our younger investors. But I have this conversation with several of our older investors, like, hey man, 5 years is a good timeline for me, but anything 10 or longer, I don't necessarily want to be tied up into it because, I may want to liquidate and pass on or whatever as they get up in age. Those are some of the key things that we talk about, I guess. Number one would be the objectives. They're not trying to, they're fine with long-term growth, but that is not the primary objective as it is for the younger people.
I'm just thinking about this as we are bringing an investment to people, right? And they're looking at the timeline. And I guess I'm kind of also thinking about this as if it's someone in the age group that we're talking about who's new to real estate investing, right? Like they now have the capital and the time, I guess, to kind of get into they're trying to look for different ways. They kind of did the traditional things and now they're moving to a different model, which In a lot of ways, it's kind of what my dad's doing right now.
It's a good point on the time and learning, because a lot of, invest in what you know. Hey, they've been working, earning, doing their thing for, their entire life up to this point. Well, now that they're retired, they have time to kind of seek out and educate themselves on other types of investment and how to do it properly and all those kinds of things. So now they have the time and they've built the funds to do this type of investing or other type, private equity, all sorts of different types of investing that they could do. That's an interesting point, because they've got, you could do your Sudokus or you could learn investing, if you're sitting around retired. What do Sudokus too? They're just fun.
They are. I love that you just reduced the entirety of their life down to just doing puzzles. But
watching Star Trek.
Oh man, there's so many. If you were someone who had really liked it but never had the time, and you were like, all right, I'm going to watch all things Star Trek now, that is like,
you could be at it for a while. That might take a retirement.
Yeah, it's so much now. Anyways, I guess what I was thinking is like they're looking at, say, we're like, hey, we have a new property, or we have a property we want to acquire, and of course, there's ranges of the types of that we acquire. Like there's some that are going to be more ready to cash flow earlier than others. But typically it's like, okay, this is not going to cash flow for at least 6 months, maybe a year.
Right.
And there's not going to be any
longer.
Yeah, maybe longer. And there's not going to be any kind of major payout, most likely, all things being equal, for like 3 to 7 to 10. And so I'm just trying to put myself in the headspace of someone seeing that timeline and being, well, that money isn't doing anything for me for a year, 2 years. But that's just one type of real estate investment, right? That's not that I want them to go get another, guys, invest with us, obviously, but I mean, there's other ways that they can deploy it.
You're coming to the answer, and the fact is, and most of them, the thing when you're to the retirement age, you tend to plan ahead better than a younger person does, and the reality is that they make multiple investments over a series of years. With that, knowing that, they say, hey, I'm not gonna quit my part-time job or whatever it is. Like I'm doing this over the course of 3 to 5 years, where I'm deploying capital in stages with that in mind, knowing that, hey, these aren't going to start throwing off, significant checks right away, depending on the investment. But that's why they make multiple investments across several different, as time goes on. So as one is hitting, and it's almost the same snowball that we talked about for beginning people getting started. But this one is stacking the cash flow more than stacking the equity returns, I would say, because you start combining, hey, this one's going to hit in 2 years, so before I really need extra cash to be coming in, I'm going to make that investment 2 years early safely, so that I know it's kicking in by that time, and they'll make another one the next year that's going to probably theoretically is going to go, might take a year, so that whenever you need that cash to kick in, like, hey, well, this one's going to be cash flowing instantly, I'll go ahead and make that investment now. But I've already got a couple that I'm counting on the cash to come in from that I've made in the past. And that's a lot of they think ahead better, I'd say, than our younger investors, because it's such a long timeline for the younger investors that it's not, I don't think year by year like the older investors, because they have to,
Well, yeah, but I also would think that very true. I would think that also if they're younger, our age or younger, and they had that amount of capital with which they could plan like that, they may do it. But if it's I've saved up, deploy, okay, now I got to save up again, deploy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
it's not like you get to step back and just like see all the pieces on the board. Like I have all of this to deploy at this moment, right? It's not.
No, that's rare. If you do, then you're doing great.
Yeah, that would be amazing if you can just if you had the capital to make that plan so young, rather than saving up to the point that you get there.
Now you're there. Yeah, exactly. Good point.
So I'm just thinking about the metrics, right? That people are going to, say, hey, this is the projected AR, IRR, COC. What's something that they should be really looking for in that? Is it the same as every other good investment, or are there a particular like nuances, as you mentioned earlier, that might be?
They're going to care less. They're going to care less about the IRR, because you use IRR to measure against a different investment. They're gonna care a lot more about the cash on cash. probably
I was
more than
thinking,
the beginner investor, because the higher it is as an average across the life of the investment. The closer it gets to 10% for them, that's great, right? Like, if they have that, $1.5 million, $2 million, whatever, not that they're going to invest that all into one deal, but I'm saying, like, if they had that and all of it is returning 10%, that's a pretty darn good living, just about anywhere in the U.S. So, that's what they're going to care a lot more about, the current cash flow, less about the equity multiples in the IRR. They're going to, they'll care about the timing of like a refinance and the overall timing of the investment, like we talked about, just so they can make sure that they're getting capital back to reinvest for that cash flow, as at times it matches up with the rest of the retirement plan. But they're going to care a lot more about the cash on cash return, especially on day one. If an investment is cash flowing from the get go, they're going to care a lot more about that than, say, a young person who can. It doesn't matter if you pay me the returns in 2 years or tomorrow. I'm not living off of it right now. I'm trying to reinvest. So the timing of the cash flow is a lot less important to a younger investor who's investing for the long term.
So a good percentage of our investors are in this age range. And so when we bring value add projects or properties, whatever you want to call it, when the whole goal is that, well, yeah, there's some work to be done. We're going to, there's some things we're going to be doing. How do you walk them through that? Is it just simply, okay, well, if you've deployed it correctly, you can bring this one online when something else is starting to produce? Or, what are those conversations like?
Well, I just have
is it ever a hurdle, I guess, to jump up?
It can be, but I don't want them to invest if it's not going to meet their objectives. So,
right.
But that's my goal, is always to be very transparent about what this particular, because they're all different. So I could be like, hey, I think we're going to be cash flowing very quickly on this one, or we're not. It might take 2 years to turn this around to where we're really making money on it. Depending on the investment, I'm just clear with them. It's like, hey, make sure this fits in your plan, whatever you have going. And oftentimes it will, because, they're seasoned investors, and they're not going to rely on this particular investment for tomorrow's, living, right? It's going to be 2 years from now when they're going to really care about what this thing's producing. So, if it starts right away, that's gravy. But if it takes a little time, that's okay too. So, it depends. I don't get it a lot. I've gotten several of older investors, but not a lot, that have said, hey, this one just doesn't make sense for our plan. In which case it's like, hey, please don't invest. I don't want to be the reason that you're short on cash for this, that, or the other thing. I want to meet your needs. Don't let me talk you into something that doesn't meet your needs.
Right. I could see how, I don't want to say it would be nerve wracking, but I can see how it might be a little bit more tense of a situation if you're in this situation and you plow a bunch of cash into something that isn't putting out, especially if there's like a hiccup or something. Whereas if you're like us and you're working and you're making money and this is, on top of all of that,
you can afford to wait. Yeah. True. And that's honestly, that's on me to make sure that that's not the case. It's like, hey, you don't need, this is not your next month's rent, or nursing home for your spouse or something, that you don't need this money for that. Don't let me lock up this money for potentially 5 years if it's needed for something in 2.
Right.
And that's just why we are very clear about what's going on and what our plan is and what could happen, not necessarily what we expect to happen.
Right. It's an interesting conversation, because in one sense you're saying, well, look, this is probably more stable and in a lot of ways safer than investing in the market or bonds or trying to do something over there. But at the same time, there could be this big gap where, depending on,
and it's locked up a lot more than it would be in stocks or bonds.
Yeah. So that's an interesting line to walk, because you're like, hey, this is actually, real estate is a really good investment because it's cash flows, because it's safe, because it's not necessarily affected by the kind of whims of the market, for lack of a better term.
Sure.
But on the other hand,
it has its potential drawbacks depending on which is why, and again, they typically have a lot of different pots, a bunch of different income streams at any given time. Hey, they've got their, they do have some in bonds. They just have some bonds or even some CDs that are just sitting there, and they're just that's what that money's doing. This money is over here. We're trying to generate higher cash flow, which would be gravy. But while we're preserving the capital, all those different things we talked about, that they typically have quite a few different pots that they're, at any given time, they're, transitioning or moving this, that, and the other with these things in mind. It's not you and I as younger people think like, well, I've got 2 or 3 big chunks of money that are working right now. You know what I mean? They probably have a dozen or so.
Well, some of them might. I don't know. I just keep coming back to the person who, this is the first time they've really thought about their own investing at all. Right. Mm-hmm. They followed their financial advisor, right?
Right.
They have their 401k.
Where all their wealth is spread across whatever their advisor said. But those, there are different pots in that too. That's kind of what I'm saying. So they can be transitioning to, hey, I want to control more. I want to invest more cash flow on my own. They're pulling gradually from, hey, this is us, we're liquidating this part of the stock portfolio. Hey, we're keeping that in bonds for now, or what, whatever. They're taking different chunks from that, their nest egg, as it were.
Right. In these scenarios that I guess I'm imagining, or that you're talking about, it is, as is always the case, the capital is finite. So they do have to make decisions, right? So that's, it may be hedged because they can make 5 decisions or 7 decisions or what have you, but there is still going to be some decisions to make. You just hope that there's enough, that in any of these instances, everybody has enough to make each of these diversifying type of investments at a level that they all will make.
They will meet the objectives.
Meet the objective. Exactly.
Sure.
I mean, I can definitely see a scenario where that's not the case, where they have some and it needs to be invested, but that's all they have, and they know it needs to do something. And
yeah. And in those cases, again, all I can do is be very, very clear on what to expect and what to be prepared for. Not, hey, you need to be prepared for this money to be locked up for 5 to 10 years, or depending on the investment, whatever's going on. But there's real scenarios where this money could be locked up and it isn't necessarily going to be paying a high cash flow that whole time, or whatever the plan is. But that's that's their decision. They're going to do what they need. If they need an investment to keep growing and, in retirement, or as they're getting to retirement, trying to determine, hey, if they're 66 and they haven't quit working yet, that's a real thing.
That's pretty standard, honestly, these days.
Yeah, true.
The average 66-year-old is probably working rather than not working in some form or fashion, I would think.
Yeah, so like if they might need to get into, hey, we can't afford to lose it, so we can't really do the stock market and the unpredictability of the stock market, but we need to keep growing because we're not there yet to where we need to be. In like real estate could be the last step to get there. So
yeah, well, I mean, we definitely think so.
Yeah,
it definitely will be, and I think that's we'll wrap it up here, but it's in talking about how there's going to be different objectives. Also implies, made me think that we look for a specific, within a range, a certain type of property. Everybody knows that listens to this, that, we're looking for specific types of investment properties, deals, whatever. But within that, there's enough range that there can definitely be a scenario where one property, we bring an investment property and there's people like, no, that timeline doesn't work. And then literally 3 months later, we bring another one and it's like, yeah, okay, this one makes more sense. Yeah, exactly. Even though our business model is, we're going to
generally
try
the same
thing. Yeah. It can be.
Well, and we also have a pretty diverse business. Some people invest directly for only cash flow. They'll buy for high cash flow day one, and that's what they buy for, and they don't target a value add because they don't want they don't want that. We do a value add where we target high cash flow as well. So we kind of, our business plan, business model, as it were, tends to cover a lot of the objectives, whether you're young, old, looking for cash flow, looking for long-term equity appreciation, all these different things. Our particular business plan is usually pretty good at covering all the bases, as it were.
All right. So I guess, just the two main takeaways here with preservation and safety and cash flow, but within that, a lot of variation, a lot of, decisions to be made, and a lot of opportunities, I would say. I don't want to feel like some of this conversation, there's been like a doom and gloom, like it might go bad, a cloud over this, but it's generally the other way.
You should always be prepared for that. Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity as well. Okay. Well, As always, guys, we really appreciate you hanging out with us and listening. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, points, etc., you can reach out to us. A comment on the bottom of this on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. I am now currently creating Facebook and Instagram stuff, so maybe you can find us on there at some point. True story, I've never created a Facebook profile before. This is the first time I've ever done it, and I feel like an old person.
Speaking of old.
Yeah, speaking of old people, apparently. I bet my dad actually probably could give me some pointers on Facebook. He's all over Facebook. So maybe you can find us on there at some point. Anyways, we appreciate you listening as always. We'd love to hear from you, and we hope you'll come back and listen again next week on another edition of the Get Invested podcast.
See ya.